I just want to say to you a few things about verbs, about nouns. We'll get to verbs very shortly. Really, you've covered the forms of the nouns at this point. There's one or two that you'll be learning the sort of new forms, and particularly irregular ones. And always irregular ones. I always think of pater and mater as being irregular for me, so that's how I learned them in the third declension. But really, you've got one, two, three. You've got your three declensions worked out now, and so really, it's fairly basic from now on. If you start to recognise some certain forms, what's going to happen is that you might think to yourself, "Well, I really don't know whether I've mastered all this." Well, as I said before, if you've mastered 50 or 60% of it, it's going to come to you as you start doing translation. And then the great thing about this is you don't have to guess the forms, because when we're really doing this, we're not really talking about doing it from English to Greek. We're doing it the other way around. When we look at a New Testament passage, we say, here's the Greek. Now what do? In other words, all the signs are there before us. And so what we need to do really is just to be able to feel somewhat confident in being able to recognize that we can crack open the signs. By crack open, I mean recognize the key elements. In other words, the stem, the difference, particularly in the third declension, between the nominative stem and the genitive stem, which is why we learn both at the same time, elpis, elpidos, and so forth. And also particularly, of course, the endings, because the endings are going to determine where the place in a sentence that noun fits. And I think what will happen after a while, I'm hoping by Christmas, and we're nearly there now when you think about it, we've only got just basically a month to go. In other words, 4 more lessons after this week. We're in a situation now where in the new year you'll get an idea of the of the nouns in respect to their form, so to speak. I'm saying this because it's a personal thing with me, and I'm trying to give you confidence to say that the ability that you've put in respect to learning off by heart and memorizing as many nouns as you can is really going to help you, because it's going to give you a sense of what sort of noun is this, so that if you come across an unusual noun with an unusual ending, let's take for example city, polis, you look at that and you think, where does that fit in terms of the endings? It doesn't fit first declension masculine or feminine. There's no omicron in it and so forth. So therefore, it doesn't fit second declension. It's certainly not neuter. So therefore, what is it? You're going to say it's third declension. And that takes you then to this whole array of third declension nouns. It's got its own logic to it, as Mounce has brought out. But the idea is that you're sort of smelling a rat straight away. In other words, when you recognize that a noun that you come across is unusual, it's usually third declension. At least that's what it is for me. When I look at it, if I come across a noun that I'm either not sure or I don't know at all. Because really when it comes down to it, most of them you can actually fashion it in terms of first declension nouns that end in eta, arche, and so forth, or first declension nouns that end in a vowel or row like chimera, and then first declension nouns that end in other than a consonant like doxa. Those are fairly straightforward by now, I should think. And likewise, the second declension masculine and neuter nouns, logos and ergon, from that standpoint. So therefore, you're really now just getting under your belt of third declension nouns. So that, for example, and I'm just going to sort of mention a few words just to sort of, I just really want to just sort of give you confidence that as you go forward, you've really cracked the market, so to speak, on the nouns at this point. And it's just really a question of absorbing those basic rules that separate the declensions and the endings too, especially dative plural. You have those combinations of syllables coming together that are not that difficult, because after a while you recognize where they are and what they mean, because they're elongated in respect to that. But I just want to take a few nouns like, for example, sarkos. You look at that. What could you say to that? Well, number one is, I think it's really easy, because sarx is flesh. It's one of the easy ones you learn. And so therefore, you know, when you see that, you don't think to yourself, this is a second declension masculine noun like logos, is it? Therefore, it's third declension. So that must be genitive singular then, from that standpoint. Likewise, I mentioned doxa. Doxa could be difficult, except that we learn doxa as the alternative to chimera or to those nouns that end in a vowel or row, then end in an alpha stem, whereas those nouns that end in other than a consonant, in other words, doxa and so forth, they also end in an alpha stem. So therefore, this is going to tell you this is first declension feminine from that standpoint. Patros, I just learned that off pater, mater, as irregular nouns that have just stuck to me in terms of that there they are, their third declension. Erga, I picked another one. Again, I think that that's straightforward because it's second declension neuter. It's not first declension feminine from that standpoint, from the rule that we've established. So it's going to be second declension. In other words, then it's going to be a neuter noun. Elpis, elpidos, I've mentioned that with sarx. In other words, if you learn the genitive along with the nominative, as Mounts and everybody says, what you do is then it comes to your mind straight away. You look at that and you think, this is like polis in a sense. It's a third declension noun. And then topos I picked likewise because that's a straightforward second declension masculine noun. So the key to it when you're looking at this is I'm not sure whether the key to it is to know the exact element of where the stem ends, as Mounts suggests. Other grammars take different views on that. They don't learn where the stem ends and then how it adds on in terms of the ending. They actually just learn simply the endings. That's one of the methods that I've used twice. So I'm familiarizing myself with Mount's method from that standpoint. But the key to it really is to look and you see this word and you can crack it open, usually, I'll say 60-70% of the time, by looking and seeing where it fits in terms of, well, obviously at this point you'd say, it's not a preposition, all right? I suppose it could be an adjective from that standpoint, but we'll learn to differentiate the adjectives, especially when they're put in an attributive case, because it means that they must be preceded by the article, all right, from that standpoint. And at the same time, when we look and we see the endings then of these nouns, we recognize that they fit within this, I'd say this sort of formula of three. I hope that's helped you a little bit. The good news is, I just want to keep saying to you, is that when you start to do a translation, you have the material before you. And so you'll remember a lot of things, and then as you revise, you will keep increasing your grammar intake. So don't be discouraged at this point if it comes at you. In fact, I would think by now you've sort of got used to it. In other words, then on the Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, it just looks like gobbledygook. In other words, you're going through it and you're wondering, wow, how am I going to hold all this together? I'm trying to learn off. And then I've got to catch up on the other stuff. Remember when I used the example of the magician with the plates and so forth? Well, you bear with it, don't you? You go through it on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. You put in an hour and a half a day. That's what I used to do, is put that time in. You learn it off. By Thursday, you've mastered, say, a half to 2/3, or at least you've got a handle upon what's been said here. And then you start a bit worried because there's stuff in the background. Well, my suggestion is that you force yourself to spend 10 minutes revising. What I would do is go through highlighting on it in terms of the previous chapters and so on, if I've not said this before. And then as you revise, then look at the highlight material, because that's all you need to do. It's the only time that I would say, if you're actually doing a study and using highlighting, to actually do this. Because usually I find students will highlight material in a book, say they're studying history or whatever, but they don't actually write out what they've highlighted in their own words to really objectify it. Now, I think you should do that. I don't think you should necessarily do that in Greek, especially when you're looking and you're saying, what you're doing is you're getting a précis, a summary of what the previous chapter is, or the chapters in respect to what's really important to you. So when you revise, you can look it through. I mean, you can look through a chapter in a matter of about 30 seconds if you've highlighted the areas, and then you just go over that. It's just, much of it, of course, is just repetition, going over and over it again. But the main stuff that you do Monday through, say, Wednesday, I'm thinking of 3 days there, where you put that time in, you write it out, you write the vocabulary out, you do it 3 times, you speak it out loud and so forth, you're listening to the DVD, you're doing it in such a way that you're using all the senses you've got to assimilate this material. And then by Friday, you should be getting, well, maybe I'm 60-70% there and so on. Keep doing that, because it's going to improve as you go along. Okay, thanks.